All right, well, welcome to this panel. It's B201, on-premises or in the cloud, choosing the best live video workflow. And we'll be talking about which is the best for different situations and hopefully stimulate some conversation with you. What we'd like you to do is make this interactive. So if you have questions as we're going through, a topic comes up that seems very relevant to what you're doing and you'd like some insight, please do raise your hand. State the question concisely. I'll repeat it so everyone can hear it and we capture it for the recording, and then we'll try and address those as we go. But if not, that's okay too. We have lots of questions to cover. So as we get started, let's first have our panelists introduce themselves. I'll start. I'm Chris Knowlton with Wowza Media Systems. I'll be moderating. And then we have three fine panelists here talking about different ways of deploying. So, Eric.
I'm Eric Hards. I currently manage our enterprise digital media internal to Lockheed Martin. We're responsible for video production, multimedia, and webcasting through the corporation.
Mm-hmm. Casey?
Hi, I'm Casey Charvet. I'm the technical director of Tour Gigs. We shoot and produce and live stream live concerts, mostly rock music, but encompassing all genres. My responsibilities include production at the venue all the way to end user delivery and ensuring that our users have an excellent online video experience.
Hello, I'm Simon Bourne. I'm Global Head of Operations and Multimedia Delivery at NASDAQ. We help corporations communicate with their target audiences online in the form of predominantly webcasting. We do about 20,000 webcasts a year, a lot of audio and a chunk of video too. And we built a workflow specific for that need that hopefully we'll get to tell you about today.
Great. Okay, thanks. Well, let's start with that. Why don't each of you just give us a brief description of the live streaming media usage scenarios that you have in your company at 10,000 foot level. Don't have to get too detailed. And then tell us whether they're on premises, on cloud, or somewhere in between.
So ours are primarily your typical enterprise. We do the corporate all hands, the director level all hands training. We do a lot of recordings for later playback, and we do a lot of communication stuff. So it's your typical internal enterprise system, and we are on-premise, built from the ground up internally and hosted internally in our data center in Denver. And we do use an external product currently as far as the actual webcasting system is concerned, which is Sonic Foundry's media site.
Okay, great.
All right. Our typical use case is filming a concert with multiple cameras, so we'll take anywhere between 6 to 10, sometimes even more than that, 12 live camera feeds, some manned, some unmanned, and we'll produce that on site. But our encoding is definitely in the cloud because our premise is changing pretty much every show we do. So we're never we don't really have a fixed premise to operate from. We use Wowza as our middleware, and these streams are then offered to the end user, usually on a pay-per-view basis, so that they can watch artists perform live from their couch, and we call that couch tour.
Cool.
Yeah, so we help corporations communicate to their target audiences. There's a large volume of investor relations calls that we do, which gives us that sort of need for scale. In audio and video. So we actually built our own system designed to suit our workflow need. We're on-prem and in the cloud. Our transcoding is in the cloud. Our encoding source, which is an MPEG transport source, is at location. And the UI that we use to schedule and monitor and operate and switch live video and audio events is actually an on-prem component. If your own data center is considered on-prem, which I think it is.
Okay, fair enough. Well, let's dive into those. Why don't you, I guess each of you just walk us through now at a more granular level, maybe the 2,000 foot level, some of the key elements of the end-to-end video workflow, from the capture that you use to the content that the viewer is actually watching, or the way they're actually watching it back, different players and such. And as you go through that, sort of what you started to do there a bit, Simon, just walk us through which ones are on-premises versus in the cloud. And so, do you want, Simon, since you actually, you kind of,
Since I
you
jumped the
started
gun,
that,
I'll
why
go
don't
in.
you keep going, yeah.
So yeah, in terms of a video workflow, we are a global company, so we deliver from a variety of different locations around the world. And we also have a requirement to pull signals off satellite or off video conferencing or fiber into our own facilities as well, which is kind of the on-prem component. So we use an MPEG transport. We historically have used high vision devices to do that with a ZTSI feeder in them to give us forward error correction and the ability to split the signals to different transcoders. And we use a proprietary transcoding management layer within the Amazon cloud. It gives us a scalability and also resiliency, which is geographically dispersed. So we'll spawn a transcoder in 2 different Amazon availability zones and feed the MPEG transport stream to that and transcode. Today we're still transcoding in RTMP, Windows Media, and HLS. Obviously that's going to change in the future, but because we service the corporation and the enterprise network, there are, believe it or not, still a number of enterprises that require us to continue to support Windows Media. So this transcoding layer is important to us, high quality source, and the flexibility to do multiple formats, bit rates out the other end. Our UI is designed for our purpose, which is why we took the decision to build our own transcoding in the cloud, because it was as much about a workflow, it was all about a workflow, as opposed to a technology. You know, the two are obviously connected. And so our UI that controls the monitoring, the provisioning, and actually the switching as well is a web-based UI that can be accessed from any connected location, and that's hosted in our data centers.
Okay, Casey?
Sure. So typical workflow for us begins at the office, where we'll pack up our gear. We'll decide what we need for a particular shoot. So this is cameras, tripods, all of the video production equipment that we'll need. So one of our focuses is that things are portable, that they're light, that they are compact and space efficient. So we consider things like, well, how many rack units is this going to take up in our 8RU flight case? And then we'll either freight or cargo that out by air cargo, and then the crew will fly out to the venue. We've done shows at venues across the United States, West Coast, East Coast, Midwest, South, Central, everywhere. We've done a few shows from London, which was its own unique set of challenges. So we get to the venue. We typically only have a few hours to set up. We usually arrive on site the night before, but we don't get access till the day of. So setup also has to be very optimized, and we're trying to set up multiple cameras, lay cables. So our production workflow has a number of sort of in-house built components that facilitate ease of deployment. We use a mixture of cameras and camera bodies in different styles, to each sort of selected to get the best shot. We've got, if you're looking at a stage that's from the audience, that's what we call a front of house shot, so we capture those with one type of camera. And then we have other cameras that are manned and on stage and are maybe connected with like a Teradek Bolt for a wireless link. We also have begun employing some remotely controlled cameras, and that also affords a very unique production look. These are all HD. Our ingest is SDI, and we bring that into Blackmagic gear where we switch it. And then we have an in-house built encoder, and we send out our single top-level format, which then enters a Wowza server running in the Rackspace cloud. We selected Rackspace for a number of considerations. I particularly like their service level, but I completely acknowledge that there's a number of other cloud providers that will get the job done just fine. From there, since we do pay-per-view, we decided to build an in-house component that handles all of the sort of pay-per-view authentication and business logic. And then the CDN will pull from that layer. We have a custom player that integrates the authentication features necessary for the pay-per-view stream, and we also have apps and channels written for a variety of devices so that viewers can consume the content on their platform of choice. Our end delivery format is HLS and HDS. We did RTMP for a while, and we've kind of just moved away from that to these HTTP chunked formats. We seem to have fewer problems for a larger swath of end users with those. Our internal CMS and provisioning and cloud management and all of that is an in-house application that we wrote. And I think that just about covers our end-to-end.
And I think I've seen in some videos, but maybe these are the ones you do on demand later, where you actually have things like on guitar camera, right? I mean,
yeah, we do. We have experimented with multiple angles. Yeah, I can touch on that very quickly. You know, since we are bringing in all of these camera feeds HD back to a central location, if we have opted to go with a multiple camera experience, we can rack multiple encoders. We can encode each of those, and we can bring up separate Wowza servers to handle each one of those deliveries because it's in the cloud. And you know, at this case, it doesn't really matter how many servers we need. We can just spin them up. And then that allows users to select their own angle. They can watch a director's cut, or if they just want to stay on the front of house and watch the light show, they can do that. Or if maybe they're a drummer, or maybe they're a guitar player and they want to just really watch that drummer do his thing. So
yeah, very cool.
For a little while, yeah.
Great. Okay, Eric.
I wonder if I could do that with my CIO. I think I could get the guitar
CIO cam?
Yeah. Sounds exciting, much more exciting than mine are, I can tell you that. But production-wise, within Lockheed Martin, we have multiple business units. Each business unit kind of has their own production team. In fact, if you look historically at where we came from a streaming environment, we started out with 23 servers across the corporation, all running different instances of Sonic Foundry's MediaSite product, and we kind of got together about 3 years ago and said, you know, this is kind of a big waste of money. Let's build this as a single enterprise system, which we ended up doing, and currently 4 of our 5 business units are using the enterprise system, which is in our Denver data center. It's a multi-Windows platform. We're using both virtual as well as standalone boxes, depending on their need. It's behind a load balancer. We can handle up to about 10,000 connections, but we've never had a webcast over about 4,000 connections. And that, interestingly enough, our limitation is not the hardware, it's the network. Although we are multicast enabled across about 85% of our network internally, we still have limitations of delivering things like the slides that go along with the presentation, or if it's an on-demand because it's unicast. We have some significant limitations internally as far as the network is concerned, so we do have to kind of manage and watch that. Most of the productions are done primarily the same. You know, it's back of the room camera environment with switchers, microphones, usually done in conference rooms or in offices. We don't have actually, there's a couple of locations that have some studio spaces, but in general they're done kind of ad hoc in whatever space is available. And like I said, although we've had environments with up to 4,000 connections, in general the average webcast is about 300 or 400 connections across the corporation.
Okay, great. So in terms of, for each of these workflows, in terms of on-premises or hybrid or cloud, what do you see as the pros and cons of your current system?
Shall I start?
Sure.
The pros with the cloud is certainly scalability or elasticity, so therefore scalability, and resiliency, because you can spin up different availability zones and then you can really create a very resilient signal flow. So that's definitely a benefit of that, of using the cloud. In terms of cons, I suppose the con was we had to build our own UI in order to address our workflow, and it would have been very nice to have something that was off the shelf. We just couldn't find anything.
And you're talking about the management layer?
The management layer,
not the end user UI.
Not the end user. No, the end user is effectively just a player, and we switch at the player side with a playlist. So we're always pointing multiple streams to the player. If a connection breaks in any point of that signal flow, and then it finds the next available stream. So that resiliency is automated throughout the whole system. Some of the hardware, I suppose another con is in terms of encoding hardware, you really want to get a longer shelf life than the market gives you. And so, we were tied to high visions. We didn't want to, within 18 months of buying them, the next generation came out, and we would have liked to have made the jump to that. But it's not a cost-effective mechanism when you're doing things on such scale to go through this sort of yearly change, even though the market is making it so that it would be very beneficial for you to do that.
Okay.
So we have a data center space, like most tech companies. We've got a couple of racks taken down. We elected to put our transcoding operations into the Rackspace cloud primarily because of the nature of our broadcasts. They last for a few hours and then they go away. So to have a lot of encoding hardware sitting around idle most of the time would kind of have been a waste. And to touch on what you mentioned with elasticity, often on special event nights like Halloween or New Year's Eve or other sort of dates where people like to do concerts, we can find ourselves doing 2 or 3 or more shows concurrently. So it's nice to be able to have the ability to bring up multiple hardwares, transcoders. The other thing is that we kind of get access to the latest hardware as Rackspace rolls out a new generation of cloud servers. Well, we get access to that without having to sort of take our older ones and forklift them into the street. So that's another big advantage for us. I think any cloud service that you go with is probably going to have top-notch monitoring and networking and all that, and most data centers do too. So I think it's kind of a neutral bit on that. One con for us, though, is sort of when we flip our use case and we're not doing a live event for 3 hours, we're beginning to experiment with this sort of always-on mock live content where we take previous shows from our back catalog and offer that as a channel. In this case, it's running 24/7, and then you're looking at 24 hours of cloud costs as opposed to 3, and then if you run that for a few days, you really start looking at the charges on it and wondering if it's time to invest in some data center hardware. So I would say that maybe we're going to move to a hybrid approach in the long run, and we still might not house it in our own data centers. It might be a managed hybrid with the cloud, but that still remains to be seen.
We looked at Rackspace a few years ago, and we found the reason why we didn't go with them was because their API wasn't responsive enough. We needed to spin up 300 instances of an encoder for a very busy audio day, and Rackspace couldn't cope with that provisioning very, very quickly. Has that changed now?
I would say probably not. No. They are at a scale that, I don't know if anybody from Rackspace is here. I haven't seen them. But in my experience, they are still sort of at a lower scale if you're in their public cloud infrastructure. Now, if you're Pizza Hut or whoever, one of their other big enterprise clients that spins up 1,000 for a football game or something, they have private cloud services that can handle that. But that's a different division. We don't really play in that pool. Let me think, are there any other pros? Geographic distribution is another big one for us. So when we're doing these live concerts, things absolutely have to work right. And it's nice to be able to bring up things in 3 different distinct data centers and not have a single geographic point of failure.
Yeah. Okay.
So most of my pros and cons actually exist both ways internally. You can imagine with enterprise environment, I'm lucky enough to have an enterprise environment. So I have all the support and data center that goes along with keeping the business running, and I can get to run my webcasting system on top of it. The downfall, of course, is I have to deal with the enterprise environment. So I have to get on a wait list to get support. And the only real benefit I have is because when we do our internal webcasts, inevitably it's for a high enough level that I can get people to do what I want them to do by dropping names. So sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, so the pro is I have all the benefits of enterprise environment. The con is that I have all the drawbacks of an enterprise environment. The other thing that we run across is things like software updates. So, if I would think in a cloud environment, you get the email that says, by the way, we're going to this system and we're going to be updating and make sure you test everything and we're moving forward. I have to go through many, many meetings and documentation and so on and so forth to get my system upgraded. In fact, we're currently 2 revisions away from the current version because it takes so long to get those software updates in process. As a large corporation, again, that's a pro because things move very slowly, so I'm not really ready to go and start broadcasting with the most bleeding edge technology immediately without doing some kind of test. Yeah. So I do have both directions from that's concerned. And actually, I'm a big proponent of cloud, but I have some other issues internally to Lockheed Martin. Most people will think, oh, it's got to be security, right? Yeah. The security is a big issue, and yes, it is, but it's not as much of an issue today as things like. Within Lockheed Martin, we might be doing a webcast, technical data that's being shared, and somebody happens to mention a number which is classified. So now I've got classified information that's sitting on a server that I literally have to remove the hard drive and destroy it. That doesn't work so well in a cloud environment. They don't like that. So there are some technical aspects that keep me from moving to a cloud environment. I think hybrid is going to get interesting. If we can actually identify ways that we can do transcoding, those kinds of things on the hybrid side, we might actually look at that. And some of the companies we're looking at, we just did an RFP and chose Kumu as our next vendor within Lockheed Martin. And that, with their new cloud environment, may give us some abilities to go beyond just having internal but hybrid environments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, security, and obviously NASDAQ has been part of the national infrastructure, as they say, has a very rigorous security policy. And so we actually had to jump through all of those hoops in the cloud as well. We qualis scan cloud encoders and the image of cloud encoders, and we've put multiple layers of web application acceleration, web application firewall, etc., all in there, and had to get operating systems passed by security that weren't, because we were using Ubuntu, for example, because it's just really efficient in the cloud. Yeah. Getting that passed by the security team was a challenge.
Yeah, but you did, right? I mean, then that's kind of how I feel. I wouldn't argue the fact that we couldn't move into a cloud environment because I think the security can be put into place. It's just the fact, and I've been in 2 situations over my 10 years of doing webcasting where I literally had to destroy a hard drive. I mean, that doesn't go well in a cloud environment.
Right. Before I go on are there questions from the audience? I want to make sure that if there are things that you want to hear or insights that you'd like to find out, that we hear from you. And if not, I'll keep going. Okay, seeing no hands. So if you were advising a colleague at another company about the pros versus cons, or I guess maybe the risks and benefits of cloud versus on-prem, or something in between. It's a little bit different, a little bit variation on the pros and cons, I guess. How would you advise a colleague at another company, what they should do, given the knowledge that you have now, having deployed the way you've deployed?
I can start with that one because I've done that already with several colleagues, and I said, go cloud. I've been dealing with our enterprise environment for such a long time and seen the growth of the cloud and its robustness that if I could move to the cloud, I would, because of the ability to expand, like you've talked about, the ability to bring on additional services if needed. There are some issues with things like getting through the firewall, and multicasting is kind of interesting too, trying to deal with that and get it to multicast internally where it's coming from an internet environment. But yeah, I've pretty much recommended to several colleagues to, don't bother building it internal, go do it in the cloud, or at least a hybrid environment.
Right.
Yeah, I suppose my recommendation would be not to think about cloud or on-premise until you really fully understand what your use case is and what your workflow is. Mm-hmm. Because actually there's pros and cons in both situations, and not using technology to lead your decision, using practicality to lead your decision. Mm-hmm. What do I need to achieve, and what is the workflow that I need to address, and then make those cloud versus on-prem solutions. If your concurrency is only ever going to be 1 or 2, do you really need a cloud environment to deliver that for you? Right. Probably not. Or if your key goal is resiliency, absolute complete resiliency, then actually a cloud environment might be quite good for you because you've got this very low-cost geographic dispersion that is very high cost if you're doing it on-prem in data centers, etc.
I think there are, though, when you look at some, I mean, there's certainly like the services you're using, very high volume, but there's several cloud environments out there that if I want to do one webcast a year, you know, it's so much more affordable than trying to set up your own environment internally.
Right.
I mean, and that's the thing is I can also spec out for those same colleagues, well, here's the hardware you're going to need along with the software you're going to have to buy, oh, and the encoders that you're going to need. And there's so many other environments out there today that literally you need a laptop, you download their app, and you're webcasting.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, I'm not saying you're right. You absolutely want to look at the use case. I just think that you certainly can look at cloud as being a lot more affordable on the onesie-twosie side than at the very large
and
scale.
future-proof as well. I mean, that's the key component. You're not investing in any one piece of hardware or tied to any one piece of software.
Good point.
It's entirely future-proof.
Yeah, and you know, if you're talking about, I don't know what hardware spec you use for your transcoding, but if you're talking about a 32-core machine with 30 gigs of RAM, and in a cloud environment, and you're paying $1 or $2 per hour on that, that's a lot of hours that you're going to get before you hit the capex of buying said server. Right. And then if you want backup, well then you'd have to buy 2 of them, and you should buy 2 of them if you're going to buy 1. So. Yeah, I mean, for most of my colleagues, we're all in sort of smaller businesses and more sensitive to costs like that.
I don't know if there's anyone in the room, but this is a question I like to ask people I talk to about which way they want to go. If anyone has gone cloud and then said, this is not right for us, we need to bring it internal. Anyone in the room done that? Yeah, it's usually the response that I get.
Deciding to maybe do that.
Based on?
Based on the amount of money we're paying to the cloud and versus, because we do hit CapEx quite often.
Okay.
So the company that I work for, we just had a lot of 24/7 streams and a lot of ad hoc where probably more than 24/7 streams would, actually benefit with the ROI, but we're still trying to decide.
I could kind of see that. I mean, if you're running those kinds of numbers and you want to really keep it up running 24/7, then yeah, you could probably make an ROI to bring it internal. But it really is something you have to look at as far as support for the long term. That's the hard part. Yeah.
Now that our team's getting bigger, that looks a little better because we have to have 4 or 5 people. But
right.
With 2, it was pretty good.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's good to know because very rarely have I heard, oh, we wanted to support it ourselves. It's usually a money thing. It's like, well, suddenly we're paying more externally than we are internally.
But not all cloud services work. So when you're in the middle of something crazy, it's nice to be able to have the hardware as a tech to go and fix it. Or you start it yourself and you have to call someone or spin up something else.
Right.
10 minutes to put all that data in versus restart.
Driving down to the data center at 3 in the morning can suck, though. So sometimes it's nice to have other people worry about that.
Yeah, well, again, pro of the enterprise environment. I can call people to drive down to the data center at 3 in the morning. So.
And can you reach someone at your cloud company that will actually respond at 3 in the morning and go fix that?
I can open a chat with my cloud company, and they are there in 30 seconds.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
That's better than me.
We've written it in our code, so we don't actually need to.
That was Rackspace, right?
That's Rackspace.
I mean, we wrote it into the underlying code that we automatically re-provision until we find one that works, and if one dies, we're provisioning it.
Well, yeah, that's the great thing about cloud services. It's sort of not the best metaphor, but they're like kind of cattle. If you have a problem with one, you just kind of
as long as you build,
put it down and bring up another one.
As long as you build expecting
pets.
it to go wrong.
Yeah.
So if you build from the ground up with the assumption that you're going to lose transcoders, you're going to lose instances.
Yeah.
From
Have you lost
the
instances?
architectural perspective, you account for that from the beginning.
Have you lost a Wowza transcoder?
Never a Wowza transcoder.
I've never lost a Wowza transcoder.
Little plug there.
Yeah.
But we don't. I mean, it's years since
anything can happen in a live stream, and will if you do enough of them. But I've yet to lose a Wowza.
But I've lost instances, but it's not mattered. So Amazon or Rackspace or any other cloud provider, on occasion, does have availability zone issues.
Yeah.
And so if you're using Amazon as a hosting environment or any other cloud provider purely as a hosting environment, you might want to reconsider that tactic. So 24/7 single point of failure, it's not the ideal use of the cloud, albeit it can be cheaper for you. you still need to build in, build in resilience.
Yeah, and I think we've seen articles about that where major sites went down because they had multiple servers, but they were all in one availability region, and the whole region went down rather than spreading them across availability regions, so they had full redundancy across regions as well.
If you're going to do the cloud, you might as well take advantage of the geographic distribution.
Right.
And you don't necessarily have to stick with one cloud provider. There's a lot of cases to be made for having transcoders close to your origin or somewhere like that. So, rack space is in some places where Amazon isn't, and vice versa. So, you don't necessarily have to stick with one.
We always try to spin up a transcoder at the closest geographical availability zone. And we still publish via CDN as well, because we're supporting Windows Media, and Amazon as a CDN doesn't support Windows Media, and never will, and I don't blame them.
I think we decommissioned our Windows Media Server.
Well, it's companies like
I hate
Lockheed
both of you. So.
It's companies like Lockheed that keep that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I mean,
but even that, I mean, Microsoft doesn't care. They've abandoned multicast, so that's going away.
And the smooth streaming is not cracking up on it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So that's going to be a problem too.
Yeah.
What I should have asked, in terms of your cloud deployment, how many or which of you are actually using CDN for any of your events? Or are you just doing it directly from your cloud edge server?
We're using a CDN. Okay. Yeah, we're publishing to a CDN as the distribution point.
Okay.
But in HLS, RTMP, and in Windows Media.
Okay. And you found a CDN that still supports Windows Media?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, Akamai still support Windows Media.
Okay, so they still have an overlay network
but
of Windows Media.
not for long, I imagine.
Yeah, certainly the number of CDNs
We still keep them in
have
business.
pulled the plugs on the traditional streaming protocols because HTTP is so much more efficient and in their wheelhouse for what they do.
And so much more profitable for them because
it's just using their web cache.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Casey, are you?
Yeah. So we use a CDN. We don't publish to a CDN since we moved away from RTMP. But we do an origin pull with a CDN. So it hits a CDN first and then hits the edge, and we found very good performance through that.
Great. Yeah. And which CDN are you using?
We're on Edgecast.
You are. Okay.
We've been Edgecast customers pre-Verizon acquisition and continue to stay with them.
We also use a CDN for web application acceleration, which is it's a great product. So that we can cache our pages on the edge as well, and our objects within the pages.
And we're actually building our own, again, on-premise. So part of the next generation system through Kumu is going to be using their software in order to build Windows Media servers to allow us to have our internal CDN. About 16 different nodes across our corporation, both internal or nationally and internationally.
How many campuses do you have just in the U.S.?
It's hard to give you that number because we have lots of 50 people or 10 people types of. We chose kind of that 15 number because we looked at where our major sites are, and then we need certain nodes in like the UK and Australia and Canada to support those environments as well. I mean, we have many more sites than 15 sites, but those are kind of the big ones that are going to need nodes on the CDN.
Okay. If there were one or two lessons learned or best practices you could share with our fine audience, what would they be, based on what you've done with cloud or on-premises?
I think we touched on it. Design for resiliency. So expect things to go wrong and design your management layer accordingly. And load test.
Yeah, you stole mine.
Did I? I'm sorry.
I'll
load
add,
test, because behavioral load is very different.
I'll add two more words to that. Load test at scale. So just because something works at 300 and looks fine doesn't mean that it'll work at 3,000 or 30,000. And certain things can manifest themselves independent of your capacity. So if you're cranking along at 300 and you say, oh look, it's everything's running fine, and we've got we're on a 10 gig E connection. We've got tons of capacity. Memory usage is fine. Just don't just assume that you can bypass the hard step of load testing at scale.
Yeah. And every point of it. So we had a mobile provider that had a very high spike in HLS requests. Typically, we see about 10% mobile usage. So you can judge, where your capacity needs to be. And we increased our capacity to handle 50,000 concurrent HLS requests, which is, it's not so much the CDN, the volume, it's the proxy and the requests from the pages that causes that load drag.
And from an enterprise, one of the things that I learned a long time ago was just involving everyone you possibly can with the initial development of the system. And I say that from the perspective of a lot of our network folks, at least internal to Lockheed Martin, haven't had to deal with video. And so it's a different animal when it comes to how they're going to sustain these kinds of streams for long periods of time, both across the LAN and across the WAN. Even dealing with multicast took us years to essentially go site by site and get that up and running and test it and working. Load testing is kind of interesting because internally you've got to have load testers, So the most I can throw at my system is 10,000 because that's all the load testers we own. If I wanted to build a system to support all of Lockheed Martin's employees, we have over 135,000 now. I couldn't even test that because I don't own that many. We use load runners. I don't own that many servers. So again, drawback of being internal, you only have the resources that you have, but absolutely having your network folks, your testers, your database folks, everyone involved, it makes a very large team and it does become unwieldy. But if you don't do that, inevitably what happens is I just turned on mobile and I'm delivering mobile across the network, and oh, by the way, there is no streaming protocol available on our wireless network. So it just stops at the router because I didn't bother to have that conversation with our wireless network folks. So that's a big one for us.
Okay. Any questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
How do you do a load test just like you do it with us if you want to do it?
The question is, how do you do a load test?
Yeah, so we are lucky enough that we have internally our own testing environments that not only for my applications, but for our own internal applications. And we use HP load runners on top of some very customized scripting in order to pull 10,000 streams to see how they interact, and also interact with the actual virtual web servers that go along with that, pulling the slides, asking questions on the system. So it all gets scripted by hand, and they become virtual users. So that's one way to definitely go about that, is look at something like a load runner product that you could actually stand up scripted users to do whatever it is that you want them to do. And it's phenomenal, the data that you get back. I mean, we broke the system over and over and over again because, oh, look, the database didn't work. Oh, look, the web server, load balancing isn't working correctly. And it really is a phenomenal product, or certainly externally something like it that allows you to throw those kinds of testers at it.
Casey, what do you use?
So we're using Apache Benchmark and some other custom scripts that will pull the data off of our system and kind of have the authentication built in for the pay-per-view, so that we can test sort of all components of the system. And this is an area of active development for us.
Right, it's no good, I guess, load testing the streaming if nobody can get past the paywall to get to the stream.
Exactly, so that's,
right?
we really need to test every component of it and not just a single piece of it like Wowza or, our CDN layer. We kind of have to test everything holistically, and that's a task that I've thrown at the developers, and it's something that we can bring up on cloud servers and to sort of get geographic distribution, see it pulling from different regions of the country, see how that sort of comes in through the CDN and perform it that way.
Do you know, I don't know the tool that they use specific for load testing. I know we wrote some custom scripts to run on the cloud that could emulate large amounts of the load.
Right.
But it is, and we went to the effort of actually drawing up exactly what we expected our performance to be everywhere down the train, and so that we test against that every time we make a change to the environment, whether it's a cloud change or on-prem change. And it's an important criteria. Actually, the team are measured against it now. It's taken very seriously. And each year we do a review and approve what we think the load of each of these components down to page load time detail, so that we are very clear about what the expected performance is and what we're benchmarking against.
I'll also add that, because Chris and I had this conversation through email just a few days ago, what he knew of in terms of load testing, and there are definitely a few services out there that you can just pay to have load test, and you can kind of specify how many minutes, at what bit rate, and how much concurrency you want. And then they'll send you a bill that is kind of a hefty bill. So, you know, I guess it, I don't really want to get into software development sort of philosophy, but we like to perform continual updates and improvements to our system, and sort of paying these services would run contrary to our overall design philosophy, and you know, would force us to kind of make updates in monthly or quarterly type updates.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. If you were going to take that workflow that you described to us a few minutes ago when you sort of dove in and went sort of step by step, and you think about how you might rebuild that from the ground up today, knowing what you know, would you change anything? Would you do something differently?
I would. It's an interesting question because it also goes into, I think, what the next question is as well. And today, the advances in hardware technology, like with Contron type devices that can do hundreds of HD streams in a 3 unit, I might consider actually bringing some of that back in prem and using the cloud just for you know, for the elasticity to take it above that, because there is some advantages in owning that tin. And historically, it's been out of the question to, you know, to be able to own enough tin in such a big space to be able to do that. And so I'm not saying I would do it, but I would reconsider it and take a long, hard look at it.
And that was a transcoding piece of hardware you're talking about?
Yeah, it's a transcoding piece of hardware.
And what was the name of it?
Contron.
Contron?
Yeah, let's
okay.
make sure I got the right note. Yeah.
Great. I'm sure some people will be
It
interested.
is very interesting.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think from a design standpoint, I would consider maybe abstracting things a little bit further to where I could do a hybrid approach more easily, to where our data center could kind of just be treated as another sort of node or availability region. And that would kind of fit in more with our forecasted models of where we're going to be running things in a mock live scenario more and more.
Okay.
Interestingly, the device is called SimCloud.
SimCloud? Yes, okay.
I think, you know, there's kind of the, what would I do differently if in a perfect world, it would be develop the network from the ground up to deal with video, but that's probably a little bit out of my realm.
Rewrite TCP/IP.
Yes, I'm just going to recreate, put in, you know, probably deal with video differently internal to the network, build a CDN from the ground up so that video is traveling on its own platform versus the one that's shared for email and everything else. That probably isn't quite as easy to do as I would like it to do. The other thing I think we would look at was, and I don't know if it's this way in other corporations, but in our corporation, it's kind of looked at as the just the fun thing. It's like, oh, video, it doesn't really matter. However, whenever we actually have a failure at something like a CIO webcast, suddenly it's the most important service known to man, and why haven't we done load balancing, and why haven't we done this testing, and why don't we have redundancy, why aren't we running separate data centers, and all those questions have been answered previously, but what I found is that it really needs to be dealt with just like any other service in the enterprise. So email is mission critical, you have an entire team that's responsible for it, you have strategic outlooks, 3, 5, 10 years, what's our next upgrades going to be, has it been budgeted, and so on and so forth, so that it becomes a service just like the telephone is. I would have liked to have dealt with the service from that perspective, and we're just now doing that, but I think if I'd done it sooner, we would have been much better off than we are today as far as dealing with video.
Yeah, we're seeing that with corporations actually more and more. It was, it's just the video component in the past, and now it's
become mission
exactly
critical.
that.
Yeah.
If it doesn't hit the CIO's desk,
Mission critical. Oh, and by the way, I want it on my iPhone and I want it on my iPad, and it doesn't matter where I am.
In fact, I'm at my desk and I want it on my iPad because I can.
Right. Yeah.
Next to your monitor.
Next to my monitor.
So I've had all those questions, and absolutely, I mean, if any of you in the room are like, hey, we're thinking about doing a webcast, and we've got this server in the back room, we're going to hook it up to this encoder, you should really stop and say, we should look at this as a strategic service we're going to offer across the corporation, and that will help you tremendously.
Okay, last question, 15 seconds each because we're out of time. What is the most promising or interesting technology that you see related to deploying streaming media, whether on-premises or in the cloud?
So the on-premises would be the Contron SIM cloud.
The SIM cloud,
interesting device.
Transcoder, okay.
Transcoder. In terms of interesting developments, I think OTT is very interesting from a corporate delivery streaming perspective. As TV is consumed more and more via Rokus and Apple TV players, the delivery of corporate streaming and webcasting, I think, is going to proliferate into that more and more, because the conference room that traditionally had a projector and a video conferencing connected to it could in the future just have a Apple TV in there. Right. And a channel from a streaming media provider.
Yeah. Casey?
Yeah, I just want to agree with that maturation of smart TVs and over-the-top devices is pretty exciting. Most exciting for me is the possibility with HEVC. So that's pretty important to us. We're usually bandwidth constricted on the outbound side at the venue, and that compression efficiency and also 4K are pretty big for us.
Yeah. Cool. Eric?
I would agree with that too. I'd also add, I haven't looked at it enough, but it's fascinating to me to look at what they're doing with multicasting with H.264. So that's going to be, we'll see how that pans out and whether or not it will replace our multicasting environment we have today. And I kind of have we all have it already, which is, at least internal to an enterprise, the phones that we're all carrying that have these video cameras on them is going to be huge. I mean, we're not even going to know how to deal with that video.
Right.
And everybody wants to be able to do it, but no one's signing up to say, what is the plan to allow employees to capture
user-generated content. Yeah.
But I'm fascinated to see what rolls out of that and the amount of content that's going to be delivered.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much to our panelists. Eric Hards, Casey Charvet, and Simon Ball. And if you have any questions for them, I'm sure they'll be willing to stick around for a few minutes afterwards and answer those. And thank you for being an attentive audience.
Thank you.